Our parents died last night. We got nowhere to go. The words stopped Michael Jordan mid-step, his hand hovering over the polished chrome handle of his custom black Porsche, parked outside the soaring glass and steel headquarters of his brand. He turned slowly, the familiar rhythm of his day meetings, endorsements, the relentless hum of his empire, suddenly silenced by a voice too small for the biting Chicago wind. Two girls stood behind him. The older one, maybe 10, held herself with a rigid stillness, her shoulders squared against the world, a posture he recognized from 1,000 tense moments on the court. Her coat was a thin, worn thing, a size too small, with a tear at the elbow. Her little sister, no older than 6, shivered beside her, clutching a tattered, one-eyed teddy bear as if it were the last anchor in a storm. For a moment, all Michael could hear was the wind whipping off Lake Michigan, a lonely, keening sound. Then the older girl spoke again, her voice clear and steady, devoid of the tremor he expected. "You're Mr. Jordan, right?" she asked. "Mama said, if anything ever happened, we should find you. She said you'd help." Michael narrowed his eyes, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "What did you just say?" "Our parents died last night," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. "We don't have anywhere else to go." The doorman, a man accustomed to waving away autograph seekers and paparazzi, glanced nervously from behind the gleaming glass doors. A valet, poised to take Michael's keys, froze, unsure of his role in this sudden, stark tableau. Michael's heart, a muscle trained for pressure, gave a single hard thud against his ribs. He stared at the girl. Her voice didn't plead. Her eyes didn't beg. She stated it as a fact, as if grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. "How did you get here?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "We took the train," she said. "Then we walked. It wasn't snowing when we left our apartment." "You've been waiting out here? In this?" He gestured to the swirling flurries that had begun to coat the pavement. "Security wouldn't let us in," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "We sat on that bench over there." She nodded toward a granite bench, now dusted with a layer of white. Michael's gaze shot to the valet. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "They tried, sir," the young man stammered, nervously adjusting the collar of his uniform. "But I thought they were just, trying to get an autograph or something." "They weren't." He looked back at the girls, really looked at them. The older one's fierce, protective stance. The younger one's pale, chapped lips. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Anna," she said. "My sister's Joelle." Joelle looked up at the mention of her name, her cheeks flushed red with cold, her eyes wide and dark in her small face. "Where are your parents now?" Michael asked, the words feeling heavy and inadequate in his mouth. "At home," Anna said, her voice catching for the first time. "In their bed. They won't wake up." Michael exhaled slowly, a plume of white vapor in the frigid air. The Porsche beeped softly, a reminder of the world he was supposed to be, in a world of private jets, board meetings, and carefully curated appearances. His personal assistant would be calling any second, wondering why he was late. But instead of turning away, instead of making the call that would delegate this problem to someone else, he heard himself ask, "Why me?" Anna didn't blink. "Mama said you once told a reporter that you learned more from your failures than your successes. She said a man who understands failure would understand this." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He stared at her, at this child who had just handed him a piece of his own life, a quote he barely remembered giving, now repurposed as a lifeline. "How old are you?" he asked. 10, she answered. "But I feel older today." Joelle let out a small, shivering sneeze, and Anna instinctively pulled her closer, wrapping her thin arms around her little sister. Michael clenched his jaw. He could walk away. He could call social services, hand them some cash, and let the system handle it. It would be the smart thing to do, the sensible thing. But Anna's words hung in the air between them, a challenge and a plea. A man who understands failure would understand this. He pulled his own expensive wool coat tighter around him and nodded toward the building. "Come inside," he said, his voice decisive. "You both need to get warm." Anna hesitated for a fraction of a second, then guided Joel past him, their small, worn boots leaving damp tracks on the pristine marble floor of the lobby. The staff stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern, but no one moved to stop them. Michael turned to the valet. "Cancel the car," he said, "and call my office. Tell them I'm not coming in today." "Sir?" The valet blinked, bewildered. "You heard me." Then he followed the two girls into the building, toward the warmth, and away from the life he had so carefully constructed, a life that suddenly felt hollow and small in the face of their quiet, devastating courage. Whatever this was, it had already begun. The elevator ascended in a silent, chrome and glass cocoon, its mirrored walls reflecting the incongruous trio, Michael Jordan, the global icon, his face an unreadable mask of concentration, and the two small girls standing silently behind him. Anna held Joel's hand in a grip that was both fierce and tender. Joel, her small body finally succumbing to the warmth, leaned heavily against her older sister, her eyes drooping with an exhaustion that went far beyond a sleepless night. 28th floor, Michael muttered, more to himself than to them. "There's a private lounge there. It's quiet." He didn't look at them, didn't ask any more questions. His mind, usually focused on strategy and statistics, was now a whirlwind of logistics, legalities, and the undeniable gut-wrenching reality of the situation. Two children, their world shattered, had somehow landed at his feet, and in doing so, had breached the carefully constructed walls of his private life. The elevator doors opened with a soft, almost apologetic chime. Michael swiped a black keycard, and they stepped into a corridor carpeted in a plush, sound-dampening gray. At the end of the hall, he unlocked a heavy oak door. Inside, the lounge was a study in understated luxury. Supple leather couches, polished mahogany walls, and a state-of-the-art fireplace that flickered to life with the touch of a button. It was a room designed for high-stakes negotiations and quiet reflection, a room that had never known the scuff of a child's worn-out boot. Anna looked around, her expression not of awe, but of careful assessment. Joel, her gaze drawn to the dancing flames, let out a soft sigh of relief. "There's a bathroom through there," Michael said, his voice still gruff. "Towels, soap, warm water." He opened a sleek, stainless steel refrigerator, retrieved 2 bottles of apple juice, and handed them to the girls. Joelle took hers with both hands, her small fingers struggling to get a grip. Anna accepted hers with a quiet nod. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a long cream-colored sofa. They did, their small forms almost swallowed by its size. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand surprisingly steady, and sat in an armchair across from them. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. "Tell me what happened," he said finally. Anna took a slow, steadying breath. "Mama and Daddy had the flu," she began, her voice low and even. "It got bad last week. Daddy was coughing all the time. And Mama couldn't get out of bed yesterday. The power went out in our building, so we didn't have any heat." Michael listened, his gaze fixed on her face, his expression unreadable. "They said if they didn't wake up one morning," she continued, her voice faltering for the first time, "we should find you. Mama said you were a good man, that you hadn't forgotten what it was like to have nothing." He flinched, the words a sharp, unexpected jab. "How did she know me?" he asked. "She used to work as a cleaner in one of the downtown office buildings," Anna explained. "She cleaned your agent's office for a while. She never talked to you, but she saw you a few times. You held a door open for her once. She never forgot it." Michael frowned, trying to dredge up the memory from the thousands of fleeting interactions that made up his life. It was a small, insignificant gesture, one he wouldn't have remembered, but to their mother, it had meant something. It had meant enough. "She said your name like it was a promise," Anna added, her voice barely a whisper, "like it was the last safe thing she could give us." He drained his glass of water in a single swallow. "Did you tell anyone else? Did you call 911? Anna shook her head. "Our phone wasn't working. We didn't know who to call. We just..." We just waited outside your building until someone said you were coming out." He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city spread out below him, a vast, glittering expanse of lights and shadows. He pressed his palm against the cold glass, the sensation a grounding force in the surreal moment. "You understand," he said slowly, his back still to them, "that I can't just keep you here. I'm not your family." "We know," Anna replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "We didn't come here to stay. We came here so someone would see us." It was Joelle who spoke next, her voice small and hoarse, breaking the tense silence. "Mama and Daddy looked like they were just sleeping," she whispered, "but they were so cold." Michael turned around, and for the first time, his carefully constructed composure cracked. He met Joelle's wide, innocent eyes, and in them, he saw a reflection of his own past, of his own fears. He saw a child who needed to be told she wasn't invisible. He gave a single, decisive nod. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, at least not tonight. He moved to the small built-in desk, opened his laptop, and then, with a sigh, closed it again. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with an email or a wire transfer. He picked up the phone and dialed the in-house kitchen. "I need some food sent up to the 28th floor lounge," he said, his voice regaining its usual authority. "Grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup, and 2 hot chocolates with extra whipped cream." He paused, then added, "And make it fast." As he hung up, Anna stood up. "We're not asking for charity," she said, her young face set with a fierce, stubborn pride. "Mama hated charity." Michael met her gaze, a flicker of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "I know what charity looks like," he said. "This isn't it." Anna seemed to consider this, then gave a short, sharp nod, as if to say, "Good, we understand each other." When the food arrived, Marcus took the tray himself. The girls ate slowly, with the cautious, deliberate movements of children who had learned not to take anything for granted. Later, as they finished their hot chocolate, Joelle finally succumbed to her exhaustion, her head drooping onto Anna's lap. Anna, her own eyes heavy, stroked her sister's hair with a gentle, practiced motion. "Do you have kids?" she asked, her voice soft. The question caught him off guard. "I do," he answered, his voice quiet. "They're grown now." She didn't ask for details, just gave a quiet, "Oh," and looked down at her sleeping sister. He didn't speak for a long time after that, just sat there in the quiet, firelit room, the storm raging outside, the city a distant, muffled hum. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. "I'm going to have to make some calls," he said. "People will need to be notified about your parents." Anna nodded, her expression somber. "I know. But tonight," he continued, "you're safe here. Tonight, you just need to rest." He stood up and went to a closet, pulling out 2 thick cashmere blankets. He gently draped one over the sleeping Joelle, then handed the other to Anna. "You can sleep on the couch," he said. "I'll be in the next room. If you need anything, you just call out." Anna looked at him, her young face a mixture of exhaustion, grief, and a flicker of something else, something that looked almost like trust. "Thank you," she whispered. He simply nodded, then retreated to the adjoining office, leaving the door slightly ajar. He sat in the dark, listening to the sound of their soft, even breathing, the 2 small girls who had walked through a storm and into his life, bringing with them a silence that was louder than any crowd, a challenge that was greater than any championship game. And for the first time in a long, long time, Michael Jordan didn't know what his next move was. He only knew that he couldn't, and wouldn't, walk away. The first light of dawn crept over the Chicago skyline, casting long gray shadows across the city. Inside the 28th floor lounge, Michael Jordan sat in a leather armchair, a half-empty mug of coffee grown cold in his hands. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night listening to the quiet breathing of the 2 girls on the couch, his mind a relentless churn of what-ifs and what-nows. The image of their small, cold faces, the memory of Anna's unwavering gaze, had replayed in his mind. each time with a fresh, sharp pang of a long-dormant emotion. His phone, which had been silent all night on his explicit orders, buzzed on the table beside him. It was a text from his head of security. "Sir, the authorities have been notified anonymously about the situation at the girl's apartment. They are on their way. CPS has been alerted." He exhaled slowly. It was done. The official process had begun, a process that would likely swallow these two girls whole, chew them up, and spit them out into a system that was overworked, underfunded, and too often indifferent. He stood up and walked to the small kitchenette, his movements stiff from the long night in the chair. He pulled out a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, and a package of bacon. He hadn't cooked for himself in years, but the simple domestic act felt necessary, a way to fill the heavy silence with something other than grief. The sizzle of bacon in the pan was what finally woke Anna. Her eyes snapped open, instantly alert, her body tensing as she took in her surroundings. Then she saw him, standing at the stove, and a fraction of the tension eased from her small shoulders. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice raspy with sleep. "A little after 7, he said, not turning around. Joelle stirred beside her, but didn't wake. "You're making breakfast?" "I am." Anna slowly sat up, pushing her tangled hair out of her face. "We're not picky," she said, a statement that spoke volumes about her life. "I figured," he replied, a hint of a smile in his voice. He plated the food: scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and toast stand, set 2 plates on the small dining table. He poured 2 glasses of orange juice and pushed them toward the empty chairs. "Joelle can eat when she gets up," he said. Anna eyed the meal with a caution that broke his heart. It was as if she expected it to be taken away at any moment. "You didn't have to do this," she said. He finally turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Maybe I did," he said. They ate in a silence that was no longer tense, but companionable. He watched her as she ate, her movements deliberate, her gaze constantly flickering to her sleeping sister. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "I've slept worse," she replied, a non-answer that was an answer in itself. He didn't press. He knew that for this child, sleep was likely a luxury, not a given. Joelle woke up halfway through their meal, blinking in the bright light of the lounge. She sat up, her eyes wide and confused, and mumbled something unintelligible. Anna was instantly at her side, helping her sit up, feeding her small bites of toast, an egg between sips of juice. Her movements were gentle, practiced, a miniature mother tending to her charge. The sight of it, the quiet, fierce love between the two sisters, twisted something deep in Michael's chest. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:15. "I have to call Child Protective Services," he said, his voice flat. "They'll probably be here within the hour." Anna didn't flinch. "I know." Joelle looked from Michael to her sister, her small face clouded with confusion. "Are we going to another new place?" she whispered. Michael cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet room. "It's not that I don't want to help," he began, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "It's just, there are rules, procedures." "I know," Anna said again, and there was no disappointment in her voice, no surprise, just a weary acceptance that was far too old for her years. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "What happens to you now?" he asked, unable to stop himself. "After they pick you up?" Anna shrugged, a small, almost imperceptible movement of her shoulders. "It depends," she said. "Sometimes a group home, sometimes a foster family, sometimes they split us up. They say they try not to, but sometimes they do." At the words, "split us up," Joelle let out a small, wounded sound and clung tighter to her sister's side. Michael stared at the wall, at the abstract art he had paid a fortune for, at the skyline that represented his success, and none of it mattered. All that mattered were the 2 small girls in front of him, their world reduced to a single, terrifying possibility. He made the call. 10 minutes later, the front desk confirmed it. A social worker would be there by 10. Anna didn't speak again. She helped Joelle finish her breakfast. Then, without being asked, She gathered their plates and carried them to the sink, rinsing them with a practiced efficiency. Then she sat on the couch with her sister, her arms wrapped around Joelle's small, trembling body, and waited. Michael paced the room, the restless energy that had fueled his career, now a nervous, agitated current. He kept glancing at the door, as if he could somehow will it to remain closed. "What happens to you now?" Anna asked suddenly, her voice startling him. He blinked, confused. "Me?" "Yeah, you," she said, her gaze steady. "You called them. You did the right thing. So what do you do now? Go back to your meetings?" He didn't have an answer. The truth was, he didn't know. He was supposed to fly to New York that afternoon for a series of high-level meetings, but the thought of it, of sitting in a boardroom discussing profit margins and marketing strategies, felt obscene. They were at the door, their thin coats zipped up, their faces pale and composed, when he stopped them. "Wait," he said, his voice rough. Anna turned, her expression questioning. He stared at them, at their small, intertwined hands, at the fierce, protective love that radiated from the older sister to the younger. "I'm not going to let them split you up," he said, the words coming out in a rush. That's not okay." Anna's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise in their dark depths. "I'll call my lawyer," he continued, his mind racing. I'll have them get involved. I can ask to supervise your placement. Make sure you're put somewhere together." Anna studied him, her gaze sharp and discerning. "Why?" she asked, the single word cutting through the air. "Because," he said, his voice dropping, "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and walking away from you two right now, that would be the biggest one yet." She didn't reply, but she gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. And in that moment, Michael Jordan knew, with a startling, gut-wrenching clarity, that something had shifted. Not just for the girls, not just for the day, but for him. The game had changed, and he was no longer on the sidelines. He was in it, and he would see it through to the end. The social worker, a woman in her mid-40s, with tired eyes and a kind but weary smile, arrived precisely at 10. Her name was Denise Waller, and she carried a clipboard that seemed to be a permanent extension of her arm. She entered the lounge with a practiced calm, her gaze taking in the opulent surroundings and then settling on the two small girls huddled together on the couch. "You must be Mr. Jordan," she said, extending a hand. "Thank you for calling. I understand the children came to you directly." Michael shook her hand, his grip firm. "Last night," he said. "Their parents passed away. I've had it confirmed by the police." Denise's professional demeanor softened, but only slightly. "And they've been with you since then?" "They walked to my building in the middle of that snowstorm," he said, his voice tight. Her eyes flicked up, a flicker of surprise in their depths. "In that blizzard?" "Yes," he said. "Hannah," he nodded toward the older girl, "said her mother told them to find me." Denise turned to Anna, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your full name?" Anna sat up straighter, her small shoulders squared. "Anna Maxwell," she said. "This is my sister, Joelle. She's 6. Denise took notes, her pen scratching against the paper. She then squatted down to Joelle's level. "Hi, honey," she said softly. "I'm here to help." Joelle didn't respond, just pressed her face deeper into her sister's side. "She doesn't talk much to strangers," Anna murmured. "She talks in her sleep, though." Denise gave a small, understanding nod and stood up, turning her attention back to Michael. "We'll have to place them today," she said, her voice all business again. "Temporary foster care, most likely. They'll be evaluated together, but I can't promise they'll stay that way. If we can't find a home that's willing to take 2. "No," Michael cut in, his voice sharp. "They stay together." Denise blinked, taken aback by his vehemence. "I've already spoken to my attorney," he continued, his voice low and determined. "Her firm will be involved in their placement. I'm willing to provide whatever resources are necessary: housing, financial support, oversight to ensure they are not separated." "You're not a relative, Mr. Jordan," she said, her tone guarded. "Even with your influence, this is a complicated process." "I don't care how complicated it is," he said, his gaze unwavering. I'm not going to let them get lost in your system. Anna's eyes, which had been fixed on the floor, flickered up to his, a spark of something unreadable in their depths. Denise studied him for a long moment, her expression a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Are you saying you want to become their legal guardian? She asked. I'm saying, he replied, his voice steady, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure they're safe. And, together. Mr. Jordan, this isn't like buying a sports team, she said, a hint of exasperation in her voice. There are hearings, home studies, psychological evaluations. It can take months, even years. I have time, he said, and if it's about paperwork, I can bury you in it. She held his gaze for a long moment, then let out a slow, weary sigh. All right, she said. I'll make a note of your interest in the case file. We can begin the process for a temporary custody review, but you'll have to go through the proper channels. In the meantime, they have to come with me. I have no authority to leave them here, even if I wanted to. Michael's jaw tightened, but he knew it was a fight he couldn't win, not yet. Can I follow you? He asked. You can, she said, but you'll have to wait in the intake center's waiting area. You won't be allowed in with them. He turned to Anna, his expression softening. I'll be there, he said. I'll be right outside. She met his gaze, her young face a mixture of fear and a fragile, burgeoning hope. You'll come back? She asked, her voice a whisper. As soon as they let me, he promised. She nodded, a single sharp movement of her head. Okay. Joelle clutched her one-eyed teddy bear tighter as Denise gently helped them into their coats. As they walked toward the door, Anna looked back over her shoulder, her eyes meeting his one last time. He gave her a firm, reassuring nod. I meant what I said, he called after them. You're not alone in this. He waited for 3.5 hours in the sterile, impersonal waiting room of the downtown intake center. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. A young mother wept silently in the corner. A teenage boy with a black eye paced restlessly, and somewhere behind a locked door, Anna and Joelle were being processed, their grief and fear reduced to a case number and a set of forms. His lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria Flores, arrived an hour into his wait, her briefcase full of files and her phone buzzing incessantly. I've filed a petition for emergency temporary guardianship, she said, her voice low and efficient. But you'll need to meet with a family services advocate, pass a background check, and provide proof of a stable and suitable home environment. I own a 7-bedroom house in Highland Park, he said, a hint of his usual impatience in his voice. That's fine, she said, not missing a beat. But they'll want to know more than the square footage of your house. They'll want to know why you're doing this. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet, stripped of its usual bravado. Because I didn't get there in time for my own father, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. And maybe this time, I can do something that matters. Maria paused, her sharp gaze softening for a fraction of a second. That, she said, will do. 2 hours later, Denise Waller emerged from the locked doors, her expression unreadable. I've placed them in a temporary group home in Evanston, she said. It's a good facility, siblings are kept together, but there are no guarantees on how long they can stay. I want the address, he said, his voice tight. I'm not sure that's appropriate, Mr. Jordan. I'm not going to go in, he said. I need to see them walk through the door. I need to know they're safe. She studied him for a long moment, her tired eyes searching his. I've been doing this job for 20 years, she said. Most people who offer to help, they disappear when the reality of the situation sets in. I'm not most people, he said. Good, she replied, a flicker of a smile touching her lips. Because those girls aren't most kids. She scribbled an address on a piece of paper and handed it to him. But don't push your luck. He followed her car in his own, the familiar streets of Chicago feeling alien and strange. He parked across the street from the group home, a neat, 2-story brick building with a small, well-tended yard. He watched as Denise led the 2 girls up the front walk. Joelle looked small and lost, her gaze fixed on the ground, but Anna, Just before she stepped through the front door, turned and looked back, her eyes scanning the street until they found his car. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but for a fraction of a second, their gazes locked, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then she squared her small shoulders and followed her sister inside. He stayed there long after the sun had set, the street lights casting a lonely glow on the quiet suburban street. He wasn't sure why he was waiting, what he was waiting for. He only knew that he had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. He wouldn't let them be alone in this. He would be there, a silent guardian, a watchful presence, until he could bring them home. It had been 3 days since he had watched Anna and Joelle disappear into the brick group home in Evanston. 3 days of a hollow, echoing silence in his sprawling Highland Park mansion. He had gone through the motions of his life-taking calls, reviewing contracts, meeting with his financial advisors, but his mind was elsewhere, circling back to the image of 2 small girls, their faces pale with grief and cold, their hands clasped together as if they were the only 2 people left in the world. He had driven past the group home a dozen times, never stopping, never getting out of the car, just a silent, circling sentinel. He hadn't spoken to them, hadn't seen them since that first day, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow responsible for them, that their fate was now inextricably linked with his own. On the 4th day, a cold, gray Saturday, he found himself parked across the street from the home again. This time, he got out of the car. He stood by the wrought iron fence that enclosed the small yard, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his coat, the wind whipping at his face. He didn't know what he was doing there, what he hoped to accomplish. He just knew he had to be there. He saw them through the large picture window in the front room. They were sitting on the floor, playing a board game with 2 other children. Joelle was laughing, a real, genuine laugh, and the sound of it, even muffled by the glass, sent a sharp, unexpected pang through his chest. Anna was watching her, a small, sad smile on her face. She looked up then, as if she could feel his gaze, and her eyes met his across the yard. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she just held his gaze for a long moment, a silent, questioning look on her face. Then she turned back to the game, her small shoulders slumping slightly. He was about to turn away, to get back in his car and drive away, when a voice behind him made him jump. "You're going to give the neighbors something to talk about, lurking around like this." He spun around to see Denise Waller standing there, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a stack of files in the other. She didn't look surprised to see him. "I work weekends," she said by way of explanation. "The paperwork never sleeps." He managed a tight, humorless smile. "Neither do I, apparently." She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze fixed on the house. "They're doing as well as can be expected," she said. "Joelle is starting to open up a little. Anna is a fortress. She's watching everything, everyone. She's been through more than any 10-year-old should have to. It's how she's survived," he said, his voice low. "It's how she's protected her sister." Denise gave a small, sad nod. "I did some digging, Mr. Jordan. It wasn't just the flu that took their parents. Their father had a history of issues. Nothing that ever triggered a removal, but there were reports. Instability, neglect. Those kids have been surviving for a long time." His jaw tightened. "What happens now?" "The review board meets on Wednesday to discuss your petition for temporary guardianship," she said. "If they grant it, you'll be allowed supervised visitation. Then we move on to the next phase. And if they don't, then they stay in the system," she said, her voice flat, "until a long-term placement can be found." He looked back at the house, at the warm glow of the lights in the window, at the 2 small girls who had somehow managed to find a moment of laughter in the midst of their grief. "How long do kids usually stay in these places?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes weeks," she said. "Sometimes years." He didn't respond, just stared at the house, a cold, hard knot forming in the pit of his stomach. "You're not the first wealthy, powerful man to try and rescue a child from the system," she said, her voice softening slightly. "But you're the first one I've seen who keeps showing up." "I failed someone once," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him. My father. I don't want to fail them too. She didn't press for details, just nodded and started to walk away. Halfway to her car, she turned back. Come to the review on Wednesday, she said. Bring your lawyer. And bring a reason that's better than guilt. He didn't answer right away. Then, his voice firm and clear, he said, I will. The next morning, he was at his lawyer's office, but not to discuss business. Maria Flores had cleared her schedule, and for 3 hours, they went over the details of his life, his finances, his home, his past. She was relentless, asking him questions that were personal, invasive, and deeply uncomfortable. But he answered them all, his voice steady, his resolve unwavering. This isn't going to be easy, she warned him. They're going to dig into every corner of your life. They're going to want to know why a man like you, a man who has everything, would want to take on 2 children who have nothing. Because they're not nothing, he said, his voice raw with an emotion he couldn't name. They're everything. At the review board meeting on Wednesday, he sat across from a panel of 3 people, a stern-faced judge, a compassionate-looking therapist, and a weary, overworked administrator. Anna and Joelle were not present. Denise Waller sat beside him, a silent, supportive presence. He told them his story, not the polished, media-friendly version, but the raw, unvarnished truth. He talked about his father, about the regrets he carried, about the emptiness that had settled in his life after he retired from basketball. He talked about the 2 small girls who had shown up at his door, their faces a stark reminder of what was real, what was important. When they asked him why he wanted to take in 2 children who were not his own, he looked them straight in the eye and said, because their mother believed I was a good man. And I want to spend the rest of my life trying to prove her right. The judge scribbled something on a notepad, her expression unreadable. The therapist smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile. The administrator just folded her hands and stared at him. We'll be in touch, the judge said, her voice noncommittal. He walked out of the courtroom feeling strangely calm. He had done all he could. The rest was out of his hands. The call came that evening, just as he was sitting down to a solitary dinner in his cavernous dining room. It was Denise Waller. The board has reached a decision, she said, her voice carefully neutral. He held his breath. They've granted you provisional guardianship, she said. 60 days, supervised, with the possibility of extension. He closed his eyes, a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees, washing over him. What does that mean? He asked, his voice hoarse. It means, she said, a hint of a smile in her voice, that you can go and bring them home. He was at the group home in Evanston in less than an hour. He walked up the front path, his heart pounding in his chest, and knocked on the door. A kind-faced woman with warm, friendly eyes answered. We've been expecting you, she said. He stepped inside, and there they were, standing in the hallway, their small bags packed, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. You came back, Anna whispered. I told you I would, he said, his voice thick. Joelle, who had been hiding behind her sister, peeked out, her eyes wide. Are we going to your house? She asked. He knelt down, so he was at her level. Yes, he said, if that's what you want. She didn't answer, just launched herself into his arms, her small body trembling. He held her tight, his eyes meeting Anna's over her head. And in that moment, in the quiet hallway of a group home in Evanston, with a small girl in his arms, and another watching him with wide, hopeful eyes, Michael Jordan felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. He felt like he was finally home.